I think that would be much advised. So, hello, my name is Phantom. We are back again bi-weekly with the Twin Empires podcast. This week we are looking at the Nightmare Host, our 8th Legion. I'm joined here today by Longsword, the writer of the Nightmare Host.
Hello.
We have Johnny, the writer of, holy shit, the Wild Hunt, the Brass Mechanists, and the Nova Bears.
'Tis I, the John Man.
Right now. Oh no, he's back.
He's here. And guest appearing this week, we also have Max, the writer of the 5th Legion, the Sons of the Mist.
Yeah, the guy that slacks off all the time. Hi, guys.
Yeah.
Hi.
You only bear in mind though, you're only guest starring because we have nobody else. You're the last possible option.
All right. If Caridius is like the real fucking deal on the Chinese bootleg.
Yeah.
B-Tech.
B-Tech.
Yeah.
Yeah, this wasn't planned. I called him like 10 minutes before the stream was about to start. I was like, "Come on, dude, we got to get this done."
We're so professional.
Indeed.
Yeah, you're so professional, man. All right, let's get started.
Let's get started. We have a lot to get to work on. So the Legion that we are working on this week is the Nightmare Host. They are our 8th Legion. And
my guys.
Your
have
boys.
a bit of a gas problem.
They do. So the Nightmare Host specializes in pacification, chemical warfare, and terror, as far as I'm aware. Anything to add on that, Longsword?
That pretty much sums it up. Yeah, there are psyops, order-keeping legion.
Yeah, and they pretty much get their job done very efficiently and with a inconsequential loss of life as well, I would say.
What's up,
If you don't care about them, then yeah, they're inconsequential.
Is the planet in line? Yeah. How many people died? It doesn't matter. The planet's in line. It's all good.
We have the infrastructure was preserved.
The buildings are all still standing.
They get onto the planet. The guys who come after the invasion force get onto the planet. They're like, "Wow, this is really quiet."
Yeah, it's like they just built a bunch of houses and left.
Yeah, it's weird. Then a bulldozer comes down the street pushing a mound of corpses.
Oh god, yeah, that's very 40k. Nightmare Host?
Yeah.
Nightmare Host, yeah, there we are.
Yeah.
So, as many of you with a bit of foresight would have guessed, those who use chemical warfare and gases, the Nightmare Host are the eventual followers and servants of Nurgle in our heresy.
Smelly boys. And
later become kind of like an absolute powerhouse of a legion following the events of the heresy. But we will get into that later. Later. Right, so where do we want to start? Do we want to start Unification Wars?
Yeah, let's go Unification Wars.
Fine. I've got the AU timeline in front of me now. So one of the first entries that I have available is they were the second wave of Astartes deployed. So they were deployed 780 Millennia 30. And oh god, I'm gonna try and say that without laughing. 786 Millennia 30 Division Commander Mesa Cephalus. Oh my god! Was chosen as the Legion Master. So these were the second wave. They were deployed when before the Thunder Warriors were purged. So they had 6 years of service before the Thunder Warriors were wiped out alongside them. And basically served quite reliably up until the beginning of the Great Crusade. As far as I am aware from what you've given me, they were quite keen diplomats. Bloodless, quite a lot of bloodless compliances I'm seeing here.
Yeah, they were, where they could, they used diplomacy, and where they couldn't use diplomacy, they would sort of approach it from the top down. So if a planet was resisting them, they'd leave, the Imperial Army or whatever to actually engage them, and then they'd send in some people to kill I don't know, the Prime Minister. And then if the planet didn't fall then, they'd kill the Deputy Prime Minister. And they just sort of work their way down the chain of command, trying to kill as few people as possible, while also sort of crippling the planet's leadership.
The only thing I can imagine now is just a Legion of Astarte suddenly go, "Who's in charge here?" Me. And just get shot. Who's in charge here now?
The big phosphate.
Yeah. They've got like a pyramid of faces attached to the wall, and they just slowly cross them off, going
Oh
down.
shit!
That's a really cool idea. Fucking so part of the nightmare host is like bounty hunters or something.
God.
Yeah.
So we don't. I think genuinely they don't do an awful lot of. They don't do an awful lot up until obviously Visara is found, but they were quite well known for efficient compliances. They did get the job done pretty easily.
Yeah. They were
Right.
known for sort of leaving worlds intact after they left, so they were pretty well liked by the Imperium at large.
It's fair enough. That'll
They
change.
got the job done. The civilians didn't like them, but the Imperium Administratum liked them.
Yeah, well, the civilians actually would like them, because if you think about it, you'd prefer to have a force like come in and kill your prime minister rather than shell your house to bits.
They'll just do that as a cast side effect, don't we?
Yeah, they
Don't
only
forget the
destroyed. That's like if someone invaded the UK, blew up the Houses of Parliament, blew up the Royal Palace, and then was just like, "No, we own you now." I don't think anyone would give a shit, really.
Yeah. No, not really.
Nuke the capital.
As long as my house hadn't been detonated, then I think I'd be all right, to be honest.
We're quite
No, we
practical
just gotta-
individuals, aren't we?
London.
Longsword. We're
Yeah.
quite. Yeah, it's just, my house is still standing. Fine.
Yeah. The people in the House of Parliament were twats anyway.
The house next over though, that's free fucking real estate. I think you know what happened to them, but fuck yeah, let's go.
Are we all the individuals who would like rat out our neighbours to the secret police? I think we are.
Absolutely.
I was gonna say on a list of fucking statements that get you two put on a fucking watch list.
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
We're already on a watch list.
Maybe we shouldn't talk about bombing the House of Parliament.
We're gonna bomb. No, wait. What are we gonna bomb? We're gonna bomb ISIS. Yes, let's go with that.
Twin Empires is now on a
Maybe we
watch
should
list.
move on.
Yeah, let's move on. Let's move on.
Right. So early on, you got anything else you want to add early on in the Great Crusade?
Not particularly. They as they expelled from Terra and they realised that their tactics really didn't need that many Astartes, they started to split up into smaller and smaller sort of crusade groups who could, because you only need a company of Astartes to assassinate someone important.
If that.
So they started sort of thinning out as they spread out until they encountered this sort of small Xenos empire where if you killed the leader, they would just upgrade the next person in line to leader. So their tactics didn't work, and it's at that point they started to reconsider and keep a stable-sized crusade group.
So is that like every single individual in that empire had the necessary experience required to just run the empire? Just like, oh, you're next in line,
Yeah,
and
it
then
was
straight
like-
away.
Yeah, it was like a sort of cyborg empire. It's like, have you guys seen Doctor Who?
I think I know where you're going with this. You're on about Cybermen,
It's
yeah.
like-
They just
Yeah, 'cause
choose
when you-
one other one to be given the rank of leader.
Yeah, it's like the leader's dead, you're now the leader, and they upload some files, and then it.
The leader.
Yeah, exactly. They just upgrade them, so their tactics really didn't work because they would just kill leaders and leaders and leaders, and then nothing would change.
Right. No, I'm with you.
Who's in charge here? He's dead. Well, who's in charge now? He's dead.
Right.
Yeah.
Legion-wise, I think that's pretty good for the early Crusade. They were known as, I believe, Peacebringers.
Peacebringers. Peacebringers.
So I believe the 8th Legion are the only Legion that we have that have, I think, 3 name changes.
Yeah. They go. Peacebringers, then Night Riders, and then Nightmare Host.
Yeah, fair enough. While we're talking about Night, then let's talk about Madrim,
Oh boy.
homeworld of Visar Tiril.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Visar's origin then.
Right, so Visar, like all the Primarchs, was scattered throughout the galaxy just before the Great Crusade started, and he landed on the planet of Madrim, which at the time was essentially run by a puppet government of gangs, and each gang was warring for itself, and the planet was basically paralyzed because there was so much conflict that no one could get anything done. Visar landed and was taken in by the leader of one of the most powerful gangs, who were known as the Knives. And under the leader of the Knives, he learned very quickly how to sort of get things done in a violent way. And he was so good at it in the end that the Knives ended up rising to be the dominant power over Madrim and incorporating all the other gangs into them. It was at that point that Visar's father realized that he was eventually going to be replaced by this thing that he was bringing up, and Visar realized that he had realized, and Visar killed him.
I know that you know that I know.
Yeah. And that's how he essentially became the leader of Madrid. After that, he set up an actual government and got rid of all the most violent gang members. And from there, he basically started developing Madrim into an actual planet rather than just a sort of pit of criminals.
So as obviously as Visar arrived on Madrim, what kind of a world was the planet? Because from all that you've kind of given me in terms of detail so far, it's like a really scummy hive world.
Yeah, it's like you've got very big hive cities, which are obviously they're hive cities, so they're really unpleasant places to be. But in between the hive cities, you've got these sort of vast chemical wastes, which have just been poisoned by industrialization. So there's, it's just desert and nasty sort of toxic spills, and it's just not a place that you'd want to be, really.
I don't know, man. It seems like the perfect vacation spot.
So that does bring us on to a topic that I think you'll need to get out of the way if we're to expand on the host further. Madrim was the sole and only manufacturing place for Fabosia.
Yes, Fabosia. That's the chemical that the whole thing was based on. Fabosia is a hallucinogenic bioweapon which essentially targets the fear centers of the brain and causes sensory hallucinations which align themselves with whatever the victim fears most.
So being amongst you will know where exactly that's from.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it can be used as a gas or as a liquid, and it's very sort of adaptable chemically, so a lot of variations sprung up from that.
And Visar, obviously being the he grew up around it, because I think the hives were using it, but not as a weapon.
No, the gangs were using it, but it was like a really inefficient, version of the chemical, which was very variable, and Visar was the one who basically created like a standardized formula for it and a production method.
So basically the gangs were using a crude version, and Visar made the refined version.
Yeah, which could be
Because
easily...
he is such a fine gentleman, I am sure.
Yeah.
I can actually see Visar being the kind of guy to just create a standardized kind of across the board. All the Fabosia factories on Madrim will be subject to kind of inspection monthly, just to make sure they're following guidelines.
Yeah, exactly. But
yeah.
I mean, yeah, he Albert Speer.
Right, so in terms of Visar, how he operates, what his character is like, can you give me some character traits? Give me some kind of insight into the mind of this individual.
Well, he he grew up as a sort of leader of a gang, and he very quickly realized that, well, I suppose it's his point of view, but he feels that the best way to defeat someone in a conflict is not through killing them, but through breaking their spirit. And the best way to do that is sort of horror and shock. So he would sort of go out of his way to sort of make his attacks on other gangs as bloody and as public as possible, because that meant that the gangs were disincentivized and the people were disincentivized from fighting against him. So he believes that, like, if you want to get something done, the best way to do it is to just sort of post-traumatic stress disorder your enemy into compliance. To do it is to just sort of...
So yeah, just playing on fear then.
Yeah, exactly. And especially, so during the Great Crusade, what he would do is before he attacked a planet, he would try and sort of recover some of its cultural, like, icons. So, like, if the planet was very religious, he would know to target, like, centers of worship first, because that would have the most psychological impact. So It wasn't just about fear, it was about targeting what was precious to the enemy.
Fair enough. So obviously Vizar gained control of the planet. Whether or not that was entirely bloodless, or whether or not there was blood involved in this takeover, it was eventually he became the ruler of this world, installed a proper government. Instead of prowling the streets and preying on the innocent, the gangs that once were in that role, they were used as enforcers and protectors of the people, as far as I'm aware.
Yeah, keepers of the peace.
Keepers of the peace, which is fair enough.
He purged the people who he knew were just violent from the gangs, and then he took the enforcers and he basically said, you're no longer working for a gang, you're working for a government, so you have to do this, this, and this, and anyone who refused died.
So kind of like a gang takeover, but it was done a lot more officially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
so he took over with the gang, but then he turned it into a government.
Fine. So we'll talk about, obviously, the discovery of Vizar. Vizar was discovered by not one, but two Primarchs.
Celestia and Varkas.
Celestia and Varkas. So the two of them arrived on Madrum. An audience was requested with Vizar, and the two of them, along with Malkador the Sigillite, who had chosen to accompany them, they had quite a lengthy conversation. I think Celestia was disgusted by Vizar's apparent, the value that he'd placed on human life.
Which is...
Yeah.
Yeah.
It wasn't very high. And Varkas at the same time, I think, was intrigued by obviously the way that this kind of value on life had developed on Madrum, but he didn't kind of cast any immediate judgments. Malkador was kind of like the intermediate generally in that encounter, but Vizar eventually agreed to join the Imperium. He was reunited with his legion, and the Peacebringers were rebranded the Night Riders. That's fine.
Yeah.
So
only
let's
commentary within 5 minutes.
So let's talk the reformation of the Peacebringers into the Night Riders. What did Vizar do to bring about this change?
Well, he saw his legion was very good at sort of efficient compliances, and he liked that. But he also saw that they had a lot of sort of scruples, like they wouldn't target civilians, even if killing civilians would have made the compliance quicker. And the thing with Vizar is he isn't like a sadist. He doesn't enjoy bringing pain to people's lives. He just knows that if you very brutally kill a lot of people in front of a lot of other people, the people who are surviving are very unlikely to to resist you anymore. So the attitude he brought to the Legion was, we're going to keep this sort of do whatever needs to be done to achieve a compliance thing, but we're going to take it to the max. So literally whatever needs to be done is going to be done. You know, if you need to bomb a whole city to bring a planet into compliance, then that's what we do.
And I think in terms of how, compared to obviously the Night Lords, which we're kind of, there's similarities between the Night Riders and the Night Lords, but I believe probably that the difference between obviously Kurz and Vizar is Vizar would just kind of like, Vizar has his gases. He can inflict a great deal of kind of like obedience within a populace just by using that gas. He doesn't even have to lift a finger.
Yeah.
Whereas Kurz and his Legion were just crazed lunatics.
Yeah, that's the difference. The difference is, I suppose, is in like motivation. Is that Kurz clearly like enjoyed killing people, like viscerally. Like even if he was doing it for his sense of justice, he clearly enjoyed doing it. Whereas Vizar doesn't. He doesn't enjoy it, but he doesn't feel that it's bad or unnecessary. He just feels that it's the best way to go about doing his job.
Yeah. So we have. I'm checking over the timeline once again.
It's like every 14-year-old nihilist who's convinced that there is no point to human life.
Basically, Vizar is what happens when you listen to crawling in my skin too much.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so I think 2 years after Vizar was found, the 13th Expeditionary Fleet, which is Vizar's fleet, encounters a human colony unwilling to join the Imperium peacefully. In a shocking display of brutality, Vizar's elite forces massacred their way through the civilian population, painting their armor with the blood and viscera of the dead. The world surrenders several days later after the civilian death toll rises beyond 1 billion. So, first major kind of like campaign by the 8th Legion, they were making an impression.
I should point out that they don't jump straight to like just massacre people. They always try diplomacy. Yeah, they don't focus on bloodshed. They just do whatever they feel will get the job done quickest. And because Vizar's in command, he always jumps to.
Violence is not the solution, but it is an answer.
Yeah, exactly. Violence isn't the solution, but it's a solution, and it works, in Vizar's view, far more effectively than anything else. But, you know, if he can get someone to join the Imperium willingly, he will.
Yeah, and I think in terms of obviously reinforcing compliance, I think a lot of the other Primarchs and even the Emperor recognized that Vizar had a means with which to quell uprising and rebellion rather quickly and efficiently. Mm-hmm. So while a lot of Primarchs disagreed with that, especially Celestia in the beginning, and then later some other Primarchs who we will talk about in depth, at least on one occasion.
Ace does not give a fuck. Ace loves.
Mad science buddies.
When I think a lot of the Primarchs just kind of turned a blind eye to it. Like they knew what the 8th were capable of. They knew what they could potentially do, but they recognized that to bring a planet end line, Vizar was the necessary evil.
Yeah. And I mean the numbers from his crusade, like he was very successful, so they couldn't argue with numbers.
No. Not many people can argue with numbers. Right. What have we got next on the old Listeroo? Adoption of chemical warfare.
And objects, brother. They cannot be debated with.
So vape them. Fuck you guys.
So we got the Fabosia weaponry being introduced into the Nightmare Host. This was something that I think he did quite early on, like at least 5 years into his service. The Night Riders were being given Fabosia weaponry.
Yeah, and the thing is with the new sort of moral center or lack of one that the Legion had acquired, anyone who showed active resistance to it, Vizard just sort of put it on the other side of the galaxy, either in a position where he knew they would die, or in a position where he knew they wouldn't be able to cause much trouble.
So calculated then. In what
Was very willing to just get rid of everyone.
Can you give us then the main means of distribution for Phobosius? Because I think the obvious one is just an orbital bombardment.
Yeah, sort of virus bomb style. Well, you've got obviously the massive scale deployment like orbital bombardment, and then you've got each legionary's suit was equipped with a sort of pressurized dispenser of it, so if they needed to deploy like a relatively good amount quickly through their suit, they could.
But it was a one-off, I'm assuming.
Yeah, it was like you wouldn't be able to sustain, like you wouldn't be able to fill a city with it, but you'd be able to like gas out an emplaced position or have blocks full of civilians if you needed to.
And I think you had some Marines who would be more recognizable in Devastator roles. They were equipped with kind of like dispersers for those as a heavy weapon.
You'd have maybe even in a tactical squad, the heavy weapons guy would be equipped with big grenades of it, or just like a straight pressurized nozzle to sort of spew out the pure gas and a tank on his back.
So they were by no means like lacking in an arsenal. And Madram obviously was working like overtime to fill the production requirements for all of this stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you could use it as a dart as well, but they prefer to use it with gas because they want to target as many people as possible.
Of course. I think we've obviously got special weapons and units that's been covered slightly. Doctrine has also been covered quite well already. How well was your Legion organized? Give me an idea of how they were dispersed.
Before Vizard becomes the Lord of Order, which we'll talk about later, he experimented with a lot of different organizations to try and see which one fit his style first. So he tried dispersing them in fairly large groups of about 1,000, and then when he realized that was too much and they weren't effectively able to utilize it, he sort of broke the Legion down into sort of around 500, though it varied depending on what the Crusade group had been before. But he didn't really get a standard unit until he became Lord of Order.
Right, and Lord of Order is obviously something that we've talked about briefly in some of our other podcasts. I think leading up to the kind of like the nearing kind of the end of the first century of the Great Crusade, the Council of Primarchs was established properly. Obviously, the Primarchs already had like a means of debating with one another, but as more Primarchs were found, and as Zilthia and Solgrim are found in 878 Millennia 30, the following year, the Council of Primarchs is established properly, which actually gives some of the existing Primarchs some like responsibilities. So Belial Dolvanus was given the title of Master of Shadows, she was responsible for kind of like covert operations across the Imperium. Zolin was given the Master of Defenses, so he was in charge of fortifying the Imperium's defenses and plants that had already been taken. Visar, to some quite controversially, but to others kind of it made complete sense. He was in charge of maintaining order across the planets the Imperium had already taken.
Yeah. And at that point, what he did was he broke the Legion down into companies of 250. And some companies would be tasked with sort of pushing out the bounds of the Imperium, but quite a lot of them were assigned to garrison worlds. Just their presence would effectively sort of halt rebellions because they were known at that time for being, the people you don't fuck with.
Yeah. And it's not obviously to the same kind of degree as Iron Warriors, where you had like one squad watching over an entire planet. But in terms of kind of like subsectors and systems, you would have at least a kind of presence of them. They'd be around.
Yeah.
Which would obviously make sure that the civilian populace was quite docile in the subsectors where they were. Because they were within walking distance, they could get over there pretty quick.
They couldn't garrison everywhere, but they had enough of force projection to be able to effectively quell rebellions where they needed.
Yeah, probably obviously told in a lot of children's nursery rhymes, just saying "Watch out, or the nightmare they'll be here for you."
Yeah, don't go out at night, kid.
So Vizaris is someone that we've talked about already. He's quite a big boy in the Legion. You have a few other characters who we've actually been working on backstories for them currently. The main one that I think we have already is Osmandius Orborn.
Yes, Osmandius Orborn. So he is just a captain in the Legion until the Great Heresy. But after the Heresy, which we'll go into a bit, he becomes the sort of right-hand man of Visor. You know, he becomes administrator. He becomes, he sends people off to do tasks that Visor wants him to do. If you give me a second, I'll actually pull up his description in the Legion channel. And I'm
looking at it now. I mean, from what I've gathered, there isn't really a lot of. There's not really a lot of potential for Legionnaires to rise above their station under Visar's.
No, not unless they particularly show themselves to have a lot of skill. Visor, if they do something courageous, he won't promote them. He'll just be like, "Well done," because he doesn't. He's reformed the Legion to essentially be devoid of sort of glory hunting.
Can we talk about the origin of the idea of Ozymandias Orborn?
Yeah, I think Johnny, you suggested it to me, like the name and a picture of him.
I was scrolling about in another Warhammer related Discord group, and I came across an image of Ozzy Osbourne as a Marine. I came up to Longsword and I said, "Hey, what if the Prince of Darkness?"
We do a lot of that though, because I think the original idea for the Nightmare host.
Fucking weaves. Oh wait, what?
And I think the only other thing that we can talk about really in the Legion is we've got your Night Seers.
Yeah, Night Seers are the librarius of the 8th Legion, and they're in charge of, in a battle, they'll be in charge of basically where they don't have Phobosia, or if they just need more of an effect for the Phobosia, they'll be in charge of reaching in, like finding commanders and reaching inside of their minds and sort of paralyzing them with hallucinations.
So in a conventional sense, they didn't function as regular psychers do. They didn't like shoot fire out of their hands and shit.
No, they could if they needed to, but that wasn't like their primary goal.
Right. Okay. Right. So we have the Legion's deeds. Do we want to talk about the Boogaloo with the 3rd Legion? Because I think that's quite a big deal. So let's set the scene real quick. Let's just hop into setting the scene. Let me find the thing. There we go. So. Setting the scene, there is a campaign going on in a cluster of hide worlds to the galactic east of Terra. Visar's Legion had been changed to his liking and had waged several campaigns already that people had just kind of like accepted. New to the scene was the 3rd Legion, the Shadow Angels, and their Primarch Zilthia. Zilthia had never worked with Vizar before. And I think a few of the other Primarchs had told her what Vizar was like, but she'd never actually bore witness to what he was like in a campaign. And that didn't end very well.
No, it's on the first day that they arrived, the Night Riders could see that the Hive Worlds were not going to surrender. So they, because the Hive Worlds are so dense in population, they basically sort of let their legionnaires off the leash and just told them to just kill. So they gassed a lot of people with the nastier variants of Phobos, and they killed a lot of people, and, you know, they took prisoners and, you know, marched them at gun emplacements just to sort of see what would happen.
Meanwhile, like, the Shadow Angels are just horrified.
Yeah, they're just looking on like, what the fuck?
So this goes on for a while.
Yeah, 15 days.
15 days, and by the end of it, they were marching on the other cities. I think the Battle of Disjin City.
Yeah.
So the Night Riders herded at gunpoint a crowd of 20,000 civilians ahead of them. And when the city's garrison was finally forced to open fire, the Night Riders avoided the majority of the fire while their prisoners were just being gunned down.
Yeah.
So on the dawn of the 15th day of the crusade, I think Zilthia had just had enough.
Yeah.
And basically just gave him an ultimatum because she just couldn't stand it. She said, "Leave. My ships will escort you out of the system, or we will make you stop."
Yeah.
And Vizar called bullshit.
Yeah. She didn't have the power to do that. They're not, you know, she doesn't hold superior rank over him. She can fuck off.
Who the fuck even is this bitch?
I've known this person for all of 5 minutes.
And so Vizar refused. He basically just said, "You don't have the authority to do this. I'm going to carry on."
Yeah, no balls.
The Shadow Angels did fire first, though.
Yeah,
and
so
they fell victim to exactly the same tactics.
Some balls.
What was happening, and he told them basically, "Okay, we don't fire first, but when we fire second, we fire better."
And I think it kind of left a bit of like scarring just in the Shadow Angels, because they found themselves like basically just being attacked by the same tactics that were used on the civilian populace.
Oh yeah, I'm assuming Zilthia didn't imagine that Vizar would use the same tactics on her legion, but he absolutely did. He had no qualms about just like doing exactly the same thing. So he was stealing gene seed, he was butchering commanders in front of their men, he was doing everything that he had done on the civilians to them.
Obviously, Astartes choose not to feel fear. But gas melting through your armor, that's still something to worry about.
Yeah, it's not so much fear at that point, it's just Vizar trying to show Zilthia, that she is not special enough to avoid that kind of treatment, and that he's more than willing to pull it on anyone.
And eventually, so this carried on for I think it was several days of fighting, until and it started off as a bit of a skirmish, and then it kind of like boiled into a kind of like a cold war between the two, until eventually Hyzo and the First Legion arrived and locked it down. Zilthia was told that she would never serve with him again, and I think up until this point, all the Primarchs have been quite complacent with Vizar doing things the way that he did it. Hyzo gave him like a little slap on the wrist and said, "Lo, you need to watch it now, because you're working with people who might not be as understanding as we are." Which he didn't really. Hyzo didn't really do anything. He broke it up, but he didn't really stop them from.
No.
Things just carried on as normal. It's just the legions were separated.
Guys, please stop.
Guys, please.
I'm begging you.
No, please.
What?
Right. Legio Phobos.
Yes, the Titan Legion who also picked gas. Yeah, we're a very odd bunch, the 8th Legion. But the Legio Phobos was the Titan Legion that was chosen to serve alongside Visor.
You could say they're a very gassy bunch.
Yeah, they fart a lot. Jesus Christ! They need to fucking work on their indigestion. Nurgle didn't fucking help them. They stink. And
they were bad before Nurgle took them.
Yeah, but so the Legio Phobos were the Titan Legion with the 8th Legion, and they very quickly adapted to the 8th Legion's tactics. The commander of that legion was pretty sort of opportunistic, and he actually sort of appreciated the effectiveness of Visar's methods. So his legion started, his Titans started using mass scale Phobos deployment and dressing themselves up to be scary.
What, like a scarecrow?
No.
Like an Imperator-sized scarecrow? How do you explain to me how you put a mask on an Imperator-class Titan?
Lots of string and hope.
So Phobos were pretty much at Visar's side, definitely for most of the heresy.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So we talk. Phobos are obviously indispensable. They are alongside for a lot of the time. Visar's relationships with his siblings. And we'll go in order. But I will leave A's for last because that segues us into another section. So Hyzo tolerated Visar. He understood what it was that Visar needed to do. He knew it was necessary, but he didn't agree with some of the methods. He knew that to some extent it was necessary and it got results, but not to kind of like the extent that he was going through. Golgoth, I don't really think he gave a shit.
No, I mean Gilgarth had his own problem there.
He was dealing with his own shit. Zilthia hated you.
Obviously.
And by definition, I think Solgrim wasn't particularly happy with the way you were doing things. But again, Solgrim by the end of it didn't have a pretty high value on life itself. No,
he's probably one of the least antagonistic people towards Visar because he's got his own moral failings. So at the very least, he can almost recognize the effectiveness of the tactics.
Yeah, it's like from one fucked up legion to another fucked up legion. Let's just leave each other alone.
Yeah.
How does Raziel feel about Visar? Max, that's you.
Max.
What?
How does Raziel feel about Visar?
Bloody hell.
I was paying attention to something else.
Professionals.
Well, he's not. Well, again, he doesn't like his siblings because of the fun stuff he gets up to during the heresy.
Doesn't like any of them. But upon first meeting him, surely he had an impression of the guy.
If Raziel wasn't such a cockhead, yeah, maybe he would get along with him.
Yeah.
Johnny, then give me Odin. Odinar.
The man does what the man do, and he do it well.
Okay.
Odin doesn't have much ground to stand on if we're talking about attacking civilians, so let's be fair.
No, that's fair enough.
I made a fucking career out of it, buddy.
Jaraxxus. I think Jaraxxus is relatively neutral on the topic because Jaraxxus sets planets on fire.
Yeah.
So he,
That's the best you really get with Visor is people are either neutral to him or they hate him.
yeah, nobody was particularly kind of like incredibly.
Except for that one special case.
Yeah, we won't talk about that just yet. The Spectres, pretty indifferent. Vizar, I would say Vizar would be quite often like requesting for the Ninth to reveal their secrets, but again, a lot of the Primarchs would request for the Ninth to reveal their secrets.
Well, he doesn't really, as long as they're getting on with their crusading, he doesn't care. You know, he's not one of these people who like thinks that everyone has to adopt his style of warfare, even though he thinks it would be better if they did. As long as you get results, then he doesn't care. He doesn't like people who like complain at him for moral scruples when they do worse than him, because his response to that is always, "Well, where's your planet?"
But in the same vein is that I think every Primarch was overly suspicious of the Ninth because there were no solid numbers revealed about their numbers. Their operations were all kind of like just like absolutely wringing wet in black ink. So there would be kind of like intrigue from at least all the Primarchs, and I would hope Vizar included, to get Belia to just fess up and so on.
Yeah, there'd be intrigue, but he wouldn't make it a priority because if it didn't affect him.
Fine. Voidbringers, they use Psykers, so Hadrian wouldn't particularly like that. But otherwise, I don't think that Hadrian's got bigger fish to fry anyway. So it's only really if there's Psykers afoot that he'd be fussed about that. Emperor's Fangs, Tigerius would only have a problem with him if he was disobeying the Emperor. Or disobeying the Imperium. I think, no, to be truthful then, Tigerius might have a problem with Visar for the crimes he commits against the Imperium citizens. War crimes.
Yeah, war crimes. Well, he might do, but then Visor wouldn't care because he doesn't care if people have problems with him.
True. Solar Wolves, Inconan would. I think Inconan's a more interesting one because Visar, while he's like massacring these populaces, Inconan would on the surface like be quite neutral on the topic, but he'd actually enjoy hearing about it though because he doesn't get to do it. I can't. Yeah.
Inconan's our empire builder, right?
Yeah, but he's also a secret like sadist.
Yeah, he might appreciate the fact that Visor, although he does massive damage to the people of the planet, he leaves the infrastructure mostly intact.
I can see like Inconan incorporating into his city designs, just kind of making it easier for gas to disperse, while not obviously making it a priority. But if he has a feeling the world is going to be like uncompliant, he kind of like makes small changes to the architecture, makes small changes to the infrastructure.
Ventilation systems that bit more sort of integrated.
Yeah, and also just kind of like designing the architecture of the city so that it's really easy for troops to deploy in certain areas and round all the populace up into a single place. That's quite that's quite interesting. Nova Bears, Johnny.
Boy, what the fuck is you doing?
I think
Shit!
Yeah.
we're gonna skip the brass mechanists just yet.
Yeah.
The Knights Gallant.
Oh boy.
I don't want to step on I don't want to step on obviously Zeph's territory. I think Leon would definitely not be comfortable with what was going on in the host. Obviously,
Leon's all about like chivalry.
Yeah.
Visor has none of it.
Yeah, there's a sense of honor within the Knights Gallant that is just not present within the Nightmare hosts. So Leon would have a problem with it.
Vizar detests the idea of honor in and of itself because he doesn't think that there is like a morality to the universe which can be measured.
Of course.
So he thinks that honor is just sort of made up by people who want to compensate for the fact that they don't have the spine to do what's necessary.
So yeah, the two of them wouldn't definitely not get on. Frostwalkers. To be truthful, Vorstus and Visar would probably not be too bad. Because Vorstus thinks honor is stupid. Visar thinks honor is stupid. Visar bombs cities from orbit using gas weaponry. Vorstus just destroys the planet's ecosystem with ice bombs. The two of them, I think, would be pretty. Yeah. Frostwalkers don't have that much of a regard for human life either. I can kind of see like a squad of Frostwalkers and a squad of like Night Riders just kind of being like, no, I have a kind of respect for the work that you do. Yeah, likewise.
Yeah.
It's just kind of one of those. Celestial Legion didn't like you. Definitely.
No, of course they didn't, because they're run by an impotent child.
Oh! I'm sorry, I had something in my throat.
Astral Jaguars, you probably wouldn't like the Astral Jaguars either, and they probably wouldn't like you.
Of course not.
Zolan has more of a spiritual vibe going on with his Legion, and that just wouldn't jam with anything that you guys have got going on.
Oh no, Vizar hates spirituality, like as a thing.
And in regards to Varkus, Varkus, I would imagine, would be quite intrigued with hearing about like how it is that a gang has been able to institute themselves as an official government on a planet. A great deal of interest, obviously, in the use of Fabosia and how it's manufactured and so on and so forth. But at the same time, not too keen on how it is applied.
No,
because Varkus in from everything that I've worked on him. And from what other people have kind of like added tidbits to, he's been built as kind of a character who enjoys learning about other cultures.
yeah.
But in terms of how that chemical is utilized, no, he wouldn't be happy.
Yeah. I mean, he and Vizar seem to get along pretty well in the actual RP.
In the RP, they got on pretty well, yeah, because you and Hesk had quite a good thing going.
That vibe.
But I think in practice, Varkus would enjoy speaking with Visar, definitely, but just not be happy with what it is that the Legion is doing.
No. Yeah, I can see that.
And I think the Star Sentinel's a bit indifferent. Tyron probably just thought of Visar as food. Easy enough? Yeah, I think that's sums it up. Let's talk then. The 14th Legion.
Oh boy.
I'm just waiting for Johnny's mic to unmute. Yeah, here we go.
Baby, let me tell you about my best friend.
I'm fading in and out of consciousness. You're gonna hear snoring soon.
Okay.
Okay.
So A.
Short.
Yeah, go for it.
Ace fucking loves Visar. Ace very much was in a very deep search for somebody who understood what it was like to not give a flying fuck about the civilian population and have the sciencey brain to back up their logic. And he found all of that in Visar.
Yeah, they worked with each other on orcs, on machines, on biology. They were both very scientific in what they did. They both sort of gelled pretty well in that one of them was a cold, sort of unthinking, uncaring machine, and the other one was A's.
So they had their projects together. The most notable one being, obviously, they tried to control the orcs.
Hey, that would have worked.
We tried to domesticate the mushrooms, but Dad said no.
No, we've got to worry about morals and.
Oh, morals! Who the fuck does morals? Oh my god!
So let's talk then the fall of the Night Riders. Visar had a facility that he had built on Barbarous. No reason.
Yeah.
And he was working on Barbarous with elements of the 14th Legion as well, to find a way to weaponize the orcs, to kind of like just try and control them, because Visar, and I think both Aze and Visar, had an appreciation for how adaptable, resilient, and just purely bred for destruction the orcs were, and they both wanted to harness it.
All laws of science, and it raised so many questions.
Yeah, they just really wanted to figure out like how they were, like how did they do everything that they did,
which eventually led to them trying to find a way to control them.
Tame an orc, yeah.
Yes.
Visar was also working on some really like messed up stuff there, like viral Phobosia.
Yeah.
Which was like, which would spread in and of itself and infect the whole planet.
But obviously, working on experimentation on Xenos, the Emperor had forbade that. So that was not allowed. So Visar and Aze were doing it in secret.
Was a pussy.
Yeah, well, yeah. Hey, you can blame the writer.
Gas him. You gotta gas him.
So this all kind of went a bit downhill when Raziel, the Primarch of the Fifth, decided that he decided that to kickstart his little his little temper tantrum / best friends project, he would leak to the Emperor and to Malcador's spy network that there was some top secret sciencey shit that shouldn't be going on Barbarous, and then just scampered onto the next thing that he was doing. I mean, he.
Look, I'm not gonna name names, but I think I got some brothers doing some mad science, if you catch my meaning.
Yeah, and then the Emperor got wind of this, obviously, and he was very angry.
Because this was after that he'd stepped down from leading the crusade. He'd gone back to Terra, and he was working on the human webway. So he was pissed off that he had to leave Terra and go back out there to deal with it. So the 11th came along, the Custodes came along, like everyone was there. He was really pissed off, and what he found was a facility being run by 14th and 8th legionaries, and he was not in the mood for it. So he just raised the facility. He gave Visar fair warning to get out. And
He didn't.
And Visar just locked himself in like one of the deepest, darkest vaults on Barbarous.
Yeah, with scientists.
Yeah, and the Emperor just razed the facility. He just destroyed it completely.
Yeah, and in the process of doing that, the damage to the facility punctured some of the storage tanks of the acidic version of Phobosia, which caused the rest of the tanks to melt and combine into a super virus, which killed the scientists and Astartes and left Visar very crippled.
So what you can basically trying to tell me is that with basically a sentence, Raziel ended your whole career.
Yeah, but he gave me a new one.
Bro, I'm gonna end this whole man's career. Let me just hit a fat dab on this motherfucker.
And so after that happened, the Emperor headed to Thermoria 7 to deal with Aze, and that is a story for another time because there's some shit goes down in there as well. But Visar, to many, they believe that he'd sealed himself inside a suit of Terminator armor because he did not wish people to gaze upon the face of one so shamed as him. but in actuality,
Yeah.
he was just fucked up on the inside.
Oh yeah, he was. He didn't want them to gaze upon his face, not because he was ashamed, but because he was melting.
And this kind of played quite heavily into Heizo's motivation for getting him to join. Heizo, who had already been had the seeds of corruption planted in him by Raziel at that point, because Raz was making the rounds at this point. He was
Going around messing with everyone.
yeah. So he'd already messed up. He messed up Visar and Aze, and then he went straight to Heizo and managed to convince Heizo that what the Emperor was doing was wrong. Heizo looked at, obviously, Barbarous being burned, Themorius being just razed to cinders, and he was like, yeah, you kind of got a point. So he approached, Heizo approached Visar, who was still sealed in his Terminator plate, and asked him if he would consider standing with him if he ever decided to secede. I'm trying to think of a better way to put it. Politely ask the Emperor to cease and desist.
Yeah.
And
The Emperor from power.
yeah. And he was quite beating around the bush with it, but Visar knew what he was on about. So that did the two of them
Loaded his shotgun with malicious intent.
But
Yeah.
I don't know if he
Malicious and said, "Woo."
did he agree that day that he was going to join, or did he kind of like sit and think about it?
When Heizo suggested it, he considered for like a few moments. Then he was like, "If it comes to that, yeah."
Fine.
Because his obedience to the Emperor was not based on anything except for the fact that he thought the Emperor was a good person to run humanity. So the moment that the Emperor stopped being a good person to run humanity was the moment that Visar lost loyalty to him.
And Heizo was like the next best bet.
Yeah, exactly.
Fair enough.
He respected Heizo as like a commander.
So after this had happened, Visar was eventually contacted by Nurgle in kind of like a fever dream or just some really hazy shit. And Nurgle gave him a choice, which is very unlike Nurgle, but I suppose
It wasn't really a choice because the choice was like join me or rot.
so. It was a choice.
But it was a choice in the same way that if I came up to you with a gun and said you can either give me all your money or I'll shoot you, that would be a choice as well.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. It's a choice.
Yeah, it's a choice.
I'm not saying that the alternatives are like it's basically like there's only one answer, but the choice is still there.
Yeah, the choice is still there. It's just not a fair choice.
But I think Nurgle had been keeping his eye on Visar for a while, and Nurgle had kind of like,
You either live long enough to die a hero, or see yourself become a villain.
oh shit. So he offered obviously Visar his demon hood, and he basically was like, "Hey, come on, dude, join Nurgle. We'll do some great things together. The lab's all set up over here in the Eye of Terror. If you want to come over, we'll get some stuff done. You know, I'm confident that this gas that you're working on, lovely stuff. I've been following it for a while. I think we could do some great things with it." So he offered him demon hood that day, and Visar, after a little bit of delegation, he decided that he was going to go for it. And this brings us into the failsafe that he had fitted into the armor of every single Astartes in the galaxy.
Yeah. So, well, not every single. So Visar, obviously, he grew up as a gang leader, so he was paranoid as shit. And he basically decided that because he knew his legion, the way he'd sort of indoctrinated his legion, they were more likely to turn against him if he grew weak someday. He built a failsafe into every Phobosia system in their armor, which is that...
Oh, sorry, my mistake.
At a specific command word, they would discharge internally and basically kill, through overdose, the Marine inside.
So when Visar decided that he was following Nurgle, and he was obviously given his demon hood at that point, he was basically concocting a method to mess up the rest of his legion, and the failsafe was
choice he was given.
yeah, basically. So he worked with Nurgle to create like a ritual in which the Fabosia in the tanks would be corrupted, and that took a while. But
Yeah.
afterwards, it basically just sent a massively broadcasted astropathic message to every single like deployment of the Eighth Legion. To which each of them, like short range Vox, was sent out to each kind of like Astartes. Any Astartes of the Eighth that received that signal, it would activate the failsafe on the armor, and the Marines would just get fucked afterwards. Their suits would just get flooded.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, that was when, and because the Eighth was so spread out as well, they were just causing panic.
Never mind. Ignore me.
Yeah. And the reason the eighths being spread out is the reason why quite a lot of them died very early on in the heresy, because they were isolated and hunted down by the larger legions.
Yes. So the Nightmare Host didn't. They were rebranded the Nightmare Host at that point. Visar rebranded them. Their name changed. But they before they regrouped and actually started getting shit done by themselves, they were targets for two notable loyalist forces. So that was the Black Ronin, the loyalist successors of the Honorbound, and also the Death Lords. The Death Lords made a point of picking off the Nightmare Host because they knew how much of a threat they were.
Yeah.
So they organized themselves. Obviously, they were creating a lot of terror across the galaxy as they kind of reformed.
But I mean, their spreading out was like a weakness and a strength, because it meant that although they were able to be isolated and shot down a lot, they were also able to spread like terror across a massive swathe of the galaxy.
Which only kind of served really in the end of it to just kind of like further the coming of Malal. Because the galaxy was just in total fucking anarchy.
Yeah, and especially with Nurgle, because it's like, even if you destroy the Nurgle Marines that are there, the planet is still going to be full of like disease and stuff, which you're going to have to either burn out or clean out.
So everyone's panicking, basically. The galaxy is panicking. Nobody knows who's on whose side. Like, people are just killing each other in the streets. It's total anarchy. So that's happening. But the main engagement that we have between the Nightmare Host and any other legion during the Crusade was actually during the Siege of Terra, which we've all lovingly dubbed the Undead Boogaloo.
Yeah.
Because the Nightmare Host, while trying to destroy the civilian populace on Terra to kind of like bait the defenders out from their walls, they just drop a shitload of gas on all of the habitation blocks.
Diseases. And they also they drop a load of gas on the habitation blocks and diseases and stuff, and they also leave a bunch of like timed explosives filled also with disease there. So like in 100 years after the Siege of Terra, that goes off and you have another outbreak of like super AIDS.
But what they were actually quite surprised to see was that despite the fact that essentially like the mother of all disease clouds had been released upon Terra's cities, they were still facing resistance. From the civilian populace, no less, because the Death Lords had established a presence on Terra, and they knew this was what Visar was going to do. So the dead that Visar had killed were still fighting.
Yeah.
And the tactics that Visar's legion had previously used were were just really ineffective against a legion that A, didn't feel fear, and auxiliary forces that didn't feel fear.
Fear either, yeah.
So it was just an absolute like disaster for the Nightmare Host in terms of that. They obviously had more numbers than the Death Lords, because the Death Lords were quite small by this point. Yeah, but the number of auxiliaries that the Death Lords were able to bring to bear.
Yeah, but in the end, it turns into basically the Night Lords using the Plague Walkers and the Death Lords using the reanimated bodies to basically have like a fucking Dawn of War match in the Hives of Terror.
But you called them Night Lords. They're the Nightmare Hosts. Stop it.
Oh yeah, nice.
Stop it. Stop it. Stop it. I up until this point, you never mentioned anything about those timed bombs, so I'm going to have to look at those at some point.
I'm sure I mentioned that. I mentioned that at the very start of our talking about the Nightmare Host. The Nightmare Host.
I will second this. I remember this.
Okay, no, that's fine.
I mentioned like throwing ventilation and poisoning water and stuff.
Okay, as long as somebody else remembers it, that's fine.
Yeah, it was at that point we convened the council. How do we stop these people from being so overpowered?
Yeah. Because I think one of the biggest problems we've had is that these guys are so overpowered.
Yeah, well, the problem.
And you still haven't nerfed Ace.
Oh no, he's getting there.
I'm not doing anything that the in canon death. Fuck me.
Death Guard.
Death Guard. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That the in canon Death Guard couldn't have done. It's just they didn't. Like the Death Guard could have poisoned the Hives of Terror in that way, but they didn't.
And they were doing other shit.
Yeah, true.
Obviously the Siege of Terror reaches its conclusion, and the Nightmare Host, along with the other traitor legions, were forced to retreat into the Eye of Terror, or just retreat back to the Aegis Ocularis, where the Dark Imperium was founded. Vizar took on a drastically different role at that point. Mm-hmm. Although he was still responsible to some aspect for keeping the populace in line, most of the other legions did that themselves in their respective territories. So Vizar, his main focus, him and Papa N were just kind of like they got brewing. Yeah. It was like Breaking Bad, but like they're just building plagues and shit. Vizar, we've got to cook.
Really bad.
So Vizar eventually ends up becoming he has a realm, the Fecund Cluster, where him and his Legion commanders, the Nightmare Cabal, all of his upper echelons, like this is where the Nightmare Host kind of comes into their own for like chemical warfare, because they split off into all these different groups and departments and sub-factions who are each responsible for trying to do something different.
Yeah, and they were all given the task of furthering an aspect of the chemical warfare.
Yeah.
So you've got people who work on like the acidic variants, people who work on like radiation, people who work on
which was
the viral.
Yeah, which I need to make clear. This was happening during the Great Crusade, but the fact that Nurgle was also offering his support, there was all this like warpy stuff going on. It just blew the door open on anything that they could be doing.
And now that they weren't like restricted as much by Imperial science, which they hadn't really cared about earlier, but now that they could completely disregard it without fear.
Oh yeah, there was like
going to town.
The funding for all of your shit just went like through the roof. There was so much going through. So Vizar, he was obviously doing this in the Dark Imperium. I know definitely that he held a place on the Shadow Council, and he led at least one Black Crusade.
Don't like siblings.
Yeah, you led at least one Black Crusade, because I think we were in talks definitely to have him try and assault Poyama.
Yeah, to at least try and capture some of the Frostwalkers'
yes
weaponry.
Yeah,
and if not disable their means of production, then try and like formulate a response to it.
Yeah, and we don't know yet how that's going to go, but we know that is definitely happening, because to clarify, Hellfrost is probably the only means of effective defense other than probably using alkaline chaff. to try and stop
Against
the
acidic stuff.
because the Imperium eventually was able to formulate some kind of a defense against the Nightmare Host. They were able to develop like this kind of alkaline shaft that they would deploy over battlefields to stop the acidic gas from becoming a problem. So auxiliaries would still have to wear like a hazard protection just to protect themselves from the gas, but the alkaline would neutralize it. Hellfrost is the only means of which it can actually kind of like just stop the gas from spreading, because Hellfrost goes absolute sub-zero temperatures and just completely freezes a battlefield, so it will neutralize to some extent the gas, and that makes
and it's I mean, if the planet isn't prepared,
they're fucked.
very little that they can do to stop it, because the Nightmare Host has such like a wide variety of things that they can fuck you over with, that they don't, that unless you literally are on a planet which contains everything, every kind of chemical defense in existence, you're not going to be able to have an unprepared response to it.
Which I think it probably stands to reason then that the Nightmare Host, their main priority is going to be, they're just going to be in the Dark Imperium, chilling, working on mad science. But when they do come out of the Dark Imperium, you'll have entire systems will fall before the Imperium can get the resources together to start prepping for a defense. There'll be a few worlds just go before they finally we need to send some shit over here now.
Yeah, it isn't even like worlds falling that will be their biggest problem. It's that Visar actually quite appreciates like infecting a world subtly, like a trade hub. So before they even know it, they've got disease on like.
It stands to reason that the Frostwalkers and the Imperium in general would just keep a large supply of alkaline chaff and Hellfrost weaponry on the planets surrounding the Dark Imperium, and obviously on the planets that are bordering Segmentum Obscurus.
Do we want to talk about the Plague Screamers?
Do we want to?
Screamers! Oh my god!
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Do it!
Right. So we all know about.
Are you all right, Max? Are you okay? Is your voice good?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. We all know about how the walking pox spreads, right?
Hey. Can I please try my best impression out of Plague Screamer?
If you promise not to deafen us.
Definitely, got it. There you go.
Yeah, it's not bad.
Jesus.
I give that a 7.
Yeah.
Favorite number. Right, so we all know how the walking pox spreads, right? Like, it's through the moans of the poxwalkers, which are then, like, if you hear it, you're infected, unless you're, like, faithful enough.
Yes, because that was in Dark Imperium to some extent, wasn't it?
In the Dark Imperium.
Right, okay.
It's a later development.
Right.
Well, the Plague Screamers are basically just that noise, but, like, broadcasted over a loudspeaker. So it's like a single Plague Screamer would just sort of fly around a battle, and anyone who could hear them, unless they had like ear protective stuff, would just be infected.
It sounds just terrifying trying to fight the host, though, because you think about like the entire battlefield is coated in mist, so you have to wear a gas mask. You got to wear ear defenders just in case you don't get infected with basically. You're not just fighting a physical enemy. You're fighting like the air. You're fighting sound. There's just sensory deprivation constantly.
Yeah, you'd be constantly worrying that you were infected, and you'd be like, everyone who got a cough would be like locked up, because you'd have no idea, like, have they employed a new weapon which we can't defend against, and that's just the first sign. Like, it would be terrifying, which is the point.
The only means with which I'd say to effectively fight the host would be is if you have the Frostwalkers deployed first, but then a lot of the weaponry would have to be autonomous. You'd have to automate all the weaponry to just try and remove that human aspect from it. But the problem with the Imperium is obviously a lot of the stuff has to have organic components, so you are fucked.
Yeah, basically.
Gee, Wouldn't it have been nice to have had an entire legion who was really good with technology on your side? That would have just been the best, wouldn't it? Would have made shit so much easier. Huh, I guess.
It's yeah,
Big oof.
the big oof.
Yeah.
The big F in the chat, boys and girls.
Yeah.
Gigantic F.
I mean, you guys all read that excerpt about the rotting fog that I posted, right?
Yeah.
Yes, because you had a few different successors as well, that all specialised in certain departments.
Yeah, you had well, each one basically takes a variant of the Fabosia and makes that its primary doctrine. So you've got the Rotting Fog, who are all about like sort of viral deployment of a specific strain which turns the body of the infected into a producer of more gas.
Okay.
So it spreads really exponentially. You've got the Communion, which are all about demons, the Deathly Choir, which are all about plague screamers.
Degradation, flesh melters.
Degradation, flesh melters, silence. I think that's it.
Yeah, I don't think you've got any more.
No.
No, I think that's it. That's it. Well, we'll get there.
Yeah.
This is just the primer. The only other thing then that we've got the Dark Imperium. Fine. I haven't had any questions in the chat. So let me just extend this question to you. What was your inspiration for writing the Nightmare Host the way that you did? And Johnny, I swear to God, if I see that mic on mute, I'm going to fucking fling something at you.
Well, my inspiration was, like, you invited me into it, and you gave me, like, a list of all the legions and the specialities that they had picked for them. And I thought psychological warfare would be cool, because the only alt 30k I've done so far was with the Silent Knives, which are the polar opposite of the Nightmare Host. So I thought doing a sort of creepy, sadistic legion would be cool. But if I'm honest, I don't really know how you would do terror tactics on a large scale. Like, I don't know what the actual techniques are that work on a massive populace.
So you cheated.
Yeah.
In short, he's not a terrorist.
Exactly. Like, I wouldn't, if you gave me a legion of like ultramarines or something, I wouldn't know how to bring a populace to its knees through fear. So what I figured is instead of trying to write something that was scary and maybe failing and maybe it not being very realistic, if I just made it chemical and like made it so that it was like the fear induced was simple, like on a base level, then it would be
yeah, because you don't have to go out of your way to be scary. Then, like, the Legion itself can decorate themselves in a terrifying fashion and do like kind of like generically scary things.
Yeah,
but the main thing is chemical.
Yeah, I don't have to think up like, oh, what would be a scary way to write a legion, because I don't think I would have pulled that off.
But I think you've got it down to the T, because like you obviously using civilians as human shields, that's a pretty fucking scummy thing to do. But it's also it sounds like something that a Terror Legion would do.
Yeah, it's like the point of them is that from a morally objective point of view, they are like morally bankrupt in every sense of the word. You know, if there is a god, then he's looking on them in terror. But
as is everyone else.
Yeah, but that's kind of the point. The point is that they're devoid of morality, and that comes from Visar. You know, he grew up, you know, being raised by a gang leader on a world which had never known anything but violence. So the point of him is that he has no moral center beyond what's effective.
I got two other questions, and I think we'll wrap it up. The first question I have: do Aze and Visar still keep in touch, even after Aze has been interned in a planet?
Like a separated couple at the moment.
Well, as much as you can, with one being a flesh demon and the other being like a planet demon. but they, if Visor A's would be helpful with something, or his knowledge would bring a new aspect to something, then yeah, he'll get in contact with him. Just give me 2 secs, guys.
Sure.
2 secs? Got it.
Kind of hard to go have a talk with your favorite brother when your favorite brother is tied to a throne and comatose, technically.
I'm back.
Yeah, Johnny put it perfectly. You'd probably get all of your messages back in like Morse code or some shit.
Yeah. They play a game where they each come up with new encryptions and they have to decode it.
You just get like a thumb drive in the post or something every so often.
And it's in like Chinese characters, and it's like garbled even in Chinese.
Okay. How would the Nightmare Host and Visar react if they came across the 5th Legion while out on one of their Black Crusades?
Well, they're enemies, so they'd. I gotta go for a second.
Sure. Max, your opinion, because obviously you're still working on how Raziel is after his ascension from the Dark Imperium, from being just a regular 5th Legion. He's Malal's boy now. In terms of how things are going on with Nurgle, I'd imagine as one of the big 4, Raz and his Legion would be gunning for them to some degree.
Yeah, but I would also think I would say they probably have the friendliest relationship with Nurgle, relatively, right? As much as you can get, because sometimes their goals align. Most of the time they don't. Raziel doesn't give a shit, but like friendly with quotations. If you know what I mean.
Yeah, so to some extent, then obviously without Visar's knowing, Raziel would be attempting to assist the Nightmare Host in their duties, because obviously if the host knew about it, they'd go after them as well.
Yeah, like Raziel if Raziel wasn't a Malal boy, he would be a Zinchian boy, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, and we talked about that quite a lot, because I think the original plan that we had for Raziel was going to be let's make Raziel and Belia Tzeentch, so they're constantly trying to one up each other.
Sorry about that.
No, that's fine. Yeah.
So yeah, we've talked a little bit about like how we think Raziel would be towards Visar, and we think like realistically Raziel would be pretty cool with Visar, and would even kind of go out of his way to help him without Visar knowing about it. Because because Nurgle and Malal's ideas kind of align to a little bit.
Yeah, as far as Visor knows, like the 5th Legion are as much enemies as the Imperium is to him.
Yeah.
So, he's just shoots on sight.
Fair enough.
He won't unless the 5th Legion comes to him like starting out with an interesting thing. He won't try and approach them peacefully. He'll just, they're enemies.
And that'll stay between the two of them, presumably.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Johnny, I'm going to allow you to unmute that microphone. Give your boy a question. Johnny, shout at us.
Give us your best shout, boy. Thank you, Johnny. That was wonderful. All right, can I shout?
No, you shouted twice already.
Fuck you.
Okay, that's 3. So
Bingo.
I think we're all done now. We got through the Q&A. We've gone through all of our summaries. Next week we are going to be looking at the Honor Bound, My Legion. Help.
Yeah.
Just fucking with you guys. Come on.
Yeah, she was just yeah. Thanks for coming along today, Max. I appreciate it.
Coming along. I did absolutely nothing. I was just here for support.
Yeah.
It was fun. It was good talking.
We'll let you go to sleep now if you're gonna go to sleep.
And remember, kids, stay hydrated. Fuck toaster.
And I think we will end it at that.